Why is it necessary for government to get bigger, for revenues to be going up all the time, when they're selling off all the family silver and they've got nothing actually to do anymore because they've sold it all?
Hi, welcome to another Flip Side. Today we're going to discuss Joe Hockey's vision of selling $130+ billion worth of Australia's assets. He claims that it's not selling the family jewels, that it is recycling, selling money so we can spend more on infrastructure. But actually, how does asset purchases work? And so I've asked my friend Greg Buck about what he thought of Joe Hockey selling $130 billion worth of assets.
The first thing is, I would ask is, how come in the West we seem to have governments that are always selling assets, and all these assets they are selling are things that were once owned by the public? In other words, they were actually what the government was looking after, but now they're selling them all. So now every year we find there are less and less and less and less things that the government's actually custodian of, whether it's the health system, whether it's Medibank or Qantas or whatever, or the trains or the power stations or the water system, anything. So all these things are getting sold and sold and sold, and all this money's being generated from this. How come government isn't getting smaller? How come the tax take and the revenue take and the reach of government and the regulations around all of us all and the fines we all get for walking our bicycles through pedestrian lights and this sort of thing, how come these sorts of things are all going up and up and up? Now, the thing I find really curious about this is on the business end of the equation, the people who are buying these assets from the government, who are they? They're all the private enterprise. They're all the people who are lobbying the government to sell them these assets. Now, why would they be lobbying the government to sell them these assets? Because they want these assets, because these are very valuable assets. These are income producing assets. These are things that everyone needs. These are things that you can keep on raising prices on, and they're necessities of life, so people need them. So business really wants these assets because they're excellent income earners. Yeah? Otherwise they wouldn't want the assets. They don't want shit assets. They want good assets. So why is the government selling them the good stuff? And I ask that question because when you actually hear about assets and asset purchases, this dovetails beautifully into all this nonsense we hear all the time about what the central banks are up to. The central banks are going around doing asset purchases. That's what they're doing. That's what quantitative easing is all about. They are doing asset purchases. So you'll see Ben Bernanke or you'll see Glenn Stevens, these kind of very staid looking central bankers who look like they're really good, kind of honest kind of people, and they're doing asset purchases. And it's very complicated. We're doing asset purchases. What does it mean to do asset purchases? It means they are buying assets and they are handing over cold hard cash in return for those assets. That's what an asset purchase is. So here I come to the whole point of my discussion. On the one hand of government, we've got the Joe Hockeys and the politicians selling really good assets to the private sector. On the other hand, we've got another arm of government, which is all the central banks, buying assets from the private sector. Now, what are they buying as opposed to what are they selling? They're selling Medibank, Qantas, all the water services, all the electricity services, all these essential services, all these really good income earning assets, yeah. What are they buying? They're buying shite from the private sector, and they're giving the private sector 100 cents in the dollar for that shite. That's what an asset purchase is. You have got assets that the banks are holding that are worthless. They're impaired assets. They are bonds, they are mortgages, they are things that the banks have gone and packaged up that have exploded and that are worthless and that are only worth 10 cents in the dollar, and they're sitting on the bank's balance sheets. Now the government, in our name, through the central banks, comes along to the private banks and says, you know, all that rubbish you've got on your balance sheet there, we'll buy that from you for 100 cents in the dollar. That's called an asset purchase. And we will give you cold hard cash for that. And you can take that cold hard cash and you can go gamble with that cold hard cash, and you can go and create a whole lot more of these junky assets and charge fees and make money for it. And when the asset blows up in your face and it's not worth any more money, we'll come and we'll do an asset purchase and we'll buy it from you and give you 100 cents in the dollar. And we call that quantitative easing. And that's to save all of us poor plebs out here on the street. They are buying crap and they are selling the good stuff.
We all know that the US Fed is printing just massive amounts of money. But how does this asset little merry-go-round affect Joe Hockey and Glenn Stevens?
Okay, so the Reserve Bank of Australia buys a whole lot of MBS, and that's called mortgage-backed securities. Okay? The reason why they do that is because they need to prop up the housing market. So what they do is they allow the banks to go out and create a whole lot of mortgages by lending people a whole lot of money. And when those mortgages go bad, the banks don't have to take the pain. The Reserve Bank will buy those bad mortgages from the banks. That's called an asset purchase. Buying crap from the private sector to keep the private sector afloat. So there you have the one arm of government doing that. Very technical, beautiful term, but they're buying crap. On the other arm of government is running around trying as hard as they can to take all of the family silver and sell it to those same people. It's a beautiful merry-go-round.
So Greg, what are your thoughts about the Qantas journey?
And it's not just Qantas, okay, but Qantas is a good example. So now we have a situation where Qantas is in financial trouble, okay? And because we live in the bailout era, Qantas now basically needs a bailout. So we have a situation where in the beginning, Qantas was Australia's national carrier. In the short term, some government guys decided that they were going to sell Qantas to private industry because private industry had lobbied them that they wanted to buy Qantas. So here we are down the track a decade or so later, and Qantas is in trouble. And now it's all clamour that Qantas is a very important company, very, very critical for Australia, icon for Australia, absolutely essential service. We can't let Qantas fail, so we need to bail Qantas out. So the question I would have is, if Qantas is that important, why was Qantas sold in the first place? The same can be said for so many important industries. The same could be said for banks. Why isn't there an alternative to a privately run banking cartel so that people can decide which one they prefer? Why is there this banking cartel? It didn't happen by accident. It's happened because all the government-run banks ended up being taken over by private industry because private industry lobbied for that to happen. Everything now is financial services and jiggling money around and seeing who you can tax and who you can steal from and who can get the biggest bailout and who can try and make things look better than they are. But actually under the surface, jobs are disappearing. The Western economies are being hollowed out to the point where there's nothing left. They keep on talking about these jobless recoveries. There's this wonderful recovery. Stock markets are surging. Company profits are going up. Everything's booming, but no one's got a job. How come? It's because all the income generating, job generating things, family silver in the Western economies have been sold. And private industry's taken those companies. They have then, under the guise of globalization, gone to the same lobbyists, gone to the same politicians, got the rules changed so that they can do all their manufacturing overseas. So none of it's done locally, so there are no jobs locally. And here we have this vicious cycle where now we get told that wages have to go down because we can't compete with overseas. We can't compete with slave children in India. I mean, it's a snowball that isn't an accident. Unless people understand that if they want to have things local, if they want to have jobs locally, if they want to have security locally, then they have to make things local. You can't outsource everything to overseas and then complain that everything's outsourced to overseas. The solution is not to outsource it over there. The solution is to make people understand that there is a price for having the security of local manufacturing. The price is things are going to cost a little bit more. No one wants to hear that things are going to cost a little bit more. No one. Things must always be cheaper. That's the mantra. But what cheaper means is that it's made somewhere else and it's always made cheaper. I mean, look, the whole business of kicking the can down the road, I mean, that is such a huge problem at the moment. The moral hazard of never, ever having to make a decision and take the pain for it now. We live in a society like that now, you know. You don't even need any money to buy a house. You just borrow it. You don't need money to buy a car, you just borrow it. Everything you borrow, everything you borrow. Everything is based on debt. Money is debt. There is no money that isn't debt. I think most people still don't even understand how money is created. You walk into a bank, you get a loan for $100,000, you get your $100,000 loan, $100,000 of money has been created out of nothing. But that $100,000 of nothing is now an asset on the bank's books, and it's a debt that you owe the bank. Money is created by issuing debt. Yes? That's how it works. Most people still cling to the old-fashioned notion that if you've got a bank account and if I've got a bank account, then what happens is I walk into the bank and I borrow some money from the bank. What I'm doing is I'm borrowing your money. In other words, the bank is taking your money and lending it to me for a fee. That's not what's happening anymore. I go into the bank, your money stays there. I get given $100,000 of new money, and this new money is debt. So the debt just keeps on going up and up and up. That's why the credit creation has to happen, because at any moment when anyone decides they're not going to actually borrow anymore, they're going to pay something off, that means that actually there's going to be a recession. So nothing can ever slow down. So the only way our system can keep on going is for debt to get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And the only way that the debt can ever be serviced, let alone paid back, is if interest rates are zero. If interest rates go up to just 1%, United States government's insolvent.